Hello everyone and welcome to Where is Xur, IGN's weekly show where we find Xur and we look at his inventory together. Today you can find Xur over here on Nessus. He's up in the Watcher's Grave hanging out on that tree that he loves to hang out on, so let's go and pay him a visit. Alright, so once you land on Nessus, go ahead and hop on your Sparrow, go straight ahead and you'll find him on that tree branch that he loves to hang out on. And here's our boy, let's go ahead and see what he's got in stock. Alright, so first up he's got Wardcliff Coil. This is a great rocket launcher. It's been very good in PvP. It's broken some stuff in PvE in the past. It's good to have in your back pocket, so grab it if you don't have it, but there's nothing special about it if you already have one. We've got the Bombardiers. These are a great exotic. Unfortunately, 64 is pretty low for an exotic. Mobility is a lot higher than I personally would prefer, and most damningly, the resilience is 2, which is the lowest it can get. So not a great roll, unfortunately, but a good exotic. Then we've got an Insurmountable Skullfort. This one's got 65, which is a little bit better, but for Titans, 16 mobility is way too high, resilience is way too low. Don't really love that stat roll, so probably a skip, unfortunately. Then we've got Ophidian Aspect, another good exotic. Unfortunately, it's only 63 stats overall. The good news is that it's got very low mobility, it's got resilience that's pretty decent, strength that's pretty good, spiky even. So if you have a roll with higher stats, but it's got lots of mobility or low resilience, this might actually be preferable. So unfortunately, the worst overall stat allocation was given the best distribution of stats. So it's kind of a weird week for exotic armor. Moving on to our exotic weapons, Hawkmoon's got a pretty decent roll. Heavy grip I love. Killing Wind is always good. Alloy magazine is great on this weapon. Fluted barrel, not excited about, so not quite a god roll, I would say. Really, without opening shot, I mean, Killing Wind wouldn't be my pick for this weapon, but it's not a bad roll, but nothing to write home about exactly. Speaking of nothing to write home about, Dead Man's Tale's got a very odd roll this week with snapshot sights, which I don't really like. It's got increased range, which again, I don't, not really wouldn't be my pick for this weapon. So it's got 2 perks that are doing that on it. So yeah, weird week for Dead Man's Tale. Probably not something you want to buy. For legendary weapons, we're doing a little bit better. Chroma Rush has kind of a weird, I don't really know how these would synergize together kind of set of perks that I'm not very excited about. Similarly, Nature of the Beast has got Dragonfly, which is good, but then Hipfire Grip, that's meh. Handling perk, that's meh. Just not a real sense of how I would use this in PvP or PvE to great effect. Then we've got Brass Attacks. I think Brass Attacks is kind of in that same pool. Yeah, it's got Surplus, which, you kind of requires you to not recharge your abilities. Reload Masterwork, which I don't really like on sidearms since they reload fine anyway. Frenzy is always good, but it's just kind of a weird roll. Moving on to the stuff I like, Nezarec's Whisper is quite interesting this week. I think this is a pretty interesting roll that I would want to check out. The first thing is Lead from Gold. Lead from Gold gives you more ammo for this weapon when you get heavy ammo to drop. I don't know about you, but when I use a glaive, I'm constantly hurting for ammo because they don't have a ton of shots, and I make liberal use of the shield, and the shield drains your ammo as well. Adaptive Munitions is a great perk for this, I think, because if you're using your special slot for a glaive, and that's how you're doing light elemental damage, then you're probably going to need, depending on the activity, something that deals damage to Void and Solar Shield. So that's a pretty good perk to have in your back pocket. And then it's got shield duration, which, as I mentioned, I use shields a lot with glaives, so I kind of like that. I think this could be a pretty great PvE weapon. Also, Alloy Magazine is great on glaives because the reload speed is very slow, and I always empty the mag when I'm reloading because the clips are so small. So having Alloy Magazine is quite good. So I quite like this. Add that with Extrovert, which, I'm not wild about any origin traits, but it's a nice one to have. Tempered Trust Rod and Auxiliary Reserves as options. That both of which have pros and cons, but it's good to have them. I think this is a pretty dang good roll, and I'm probably gonna pick it up and try it. And maybe you should too. I like glaives. It's also just nice that Xur is selling glaives. He doesn't do it too often, so it's nice to be talking about something that I don't get to talk about often on this show. Next up, we've got Ikelos Shotgun. Speaking of things I talk about all the time, because he sells this weapon so much. This one actually is good, though. Threat Detector, which is good when you're in close proximity with enemies, which is great when you're using a shotgun, because you are always in close proximity if you're using a shotgun correctly. Incandescent, which has great synergy with being in close proximity, because it spreads Scorch to enemies after you kill someone, which is great with a shotgun. The Handling Speed Masterwork, which maybe wouldn't be my choice of Masterworks if I was making this, but it's still good. Yeah, and just in general, this seems like it will have a lot of synergy, and it sounds fun for PvE specifically. So maybe pick that up if you're looking for a fun PvE shotgun, solar shotgun specifically. Bump in the Night kind of has the same problem as some of the other legendary weapons this week, which is I don't really understand how it's going to synergize for PvP or PvE in a way that makes any sense. It's got some interesting perks, but I'm sort of just like, all right. I mean, I don't really... It's okay, I guess. Nothing special about it. And then finally, we've got the class swords. I sort of talked about these to death, how they are decent swords if you don't have them, but there's not any reason that they're the best swords in the game that you should really consider them for any special reason. But they are cool. The Hunter's got Quick Fang, which I'm on my Hunter character right now, so you can check that out if you want. And then finally, we're going to move on to armor. Which armor this week is interesting. Hunter's got some really cool rolls, starting with these grips, which have 2 mobility and then really well-rounded stats pretty much across the board, which is great if you don't care about mobility on your Hunter. Some Hunters do. Really, the problem with this is it's only 64 stats, which isn't really amazing, but it's not bad, nothing to shake a stick at. So with 2 mobility, it's definitely worth considering. Similarly, this has low mobility, the vest. It's got 6, so it's slightly higher, but its resilience is spiky, and its strength is pretty good. So this is better for people who are looking for a spiky roll. Only problem is if you don't care about mobility, you're spending a little bit more on mobility here. But still a very interesting roll for build crafting, which is cool. The helmet is less exciting in terms of how many stat points it gives you, only 62, which is normally something I wouldn't recommend, except for this one has 2 mobility and pretty decent stats, so it's kind of a parallel to the gauntlets, but not as good. But still, if you're building a low mobility, high resilience roll for Hunters, you could do a lot worse, so this is a good one to look at. And then finally, we've got the boots, which are really just bad. Probably shouldn't buy them. 59 overall, and there's nothing super exciting about their stat distributions either. And with that, we will move on to the Warlock. And here we are to look at the Warlock armor. So Warlocks also got some interesting rolls this week. They have a 266 stat armor pieces, which is great. Unfortunately, their stat distributions aren't what I would pick. This one's got quite high mobility, and the resilience isn't very good. But still, 66 points. When Xur shows you a 66 stat legendary armor, you look at it, okay? Regardless of how much the stats make you sad, the distributions. We've got this 61 pair, which kind of has the same problem, except for it's also low stat, so probably wouldn't buy the robes. But then we've got the hood, the helmet, which is great. 66 stats overall. Unfortunately, has the exact same problem as the gloves, where it's got 12 mobility and nothing spiky about the actual stats across the board. But again, it's a 66 stat. I'm not trying to be stingy. I'm happy anytime Xur gives me anything that's even worth considering. So, with 266 stat pieces of armor, if you're a Warlock, maybe starting out, you don't have the best gear in the world, these are something to consider. And then finally, we've got this pair of 59 boots, which are, that's bad. Don't buy them. And with that, let's finish off with the Titan. And here we are once again to look at the Titan armor. All right, so Titans this week definitely got the short end of the stick, but they do have some interesting stuff. They've got this 64 pair of gauntlets. Unfortunately, the mobility is sky high. Resilience isn't great. And, I don't know many Titans that would be stoked about that. We've got the chest piece, which kind of has the same problem, except for with 61, so not worth looking at. The helmet, which have the same problem, but with 62 stats. And then finally, the boots. And the boots are really the only thing I think worth considering this week. Unfortunately, they only have 63 stats, which isn't amazing, but their mobility is 6, resilience is 20, which is spiky, and strength is 23, which is also spiky. So depending on your build, if you just care about resilience and strength, this might end up being better than some of the other armor pieces you have, even though it's not amazing in terms of how many stats it has in general. So definitely worth taking a look at if you are a Titan. And that is it for Xur this week. Hopefully this video was useful to some of you. And as always, we will be back next week with more Xur and more stuff to look at. So for everything else related to Destiny, stick with IGN.